Ordinary people, he said. And you. The words drifted between them and settled like a single leaf. A little boy picked up a big yellow leaf and rushed to show his mother. In that instant, Ethan met the mother's eyes, the calm look of someone who knows the just enough kind of happiness usually lives in a coat sleeve. He thought of meeting rooms, spreadsheets, applause that once convinced him life was a slope to climb and keep climbing. On this bench, life was a flat plane with many bright streaks. I don't know if I'll go back to work the way I did, he said, unplanned words. But today, I want to learn to cook lunch. Grace tilted her head, a smile she couldn't hide. Stewed carrots? Can I learn something easier? Congee, she suggested. Congee, he laughed. Done. They were home before noon. Ethan chopped scallions slowly. His eyes stung, tears not for sorrow but for onions doing their job. Grace stood beside him, guiding. The right flame, the right water, a reminder to stir the same direction so the rice wouldn't stick. Steam rose in white sheets, pure as hospital morning, warmer and fuller now. When the congee was done, he ladled it into bowls and set them on the table, feeling a small, solid joy. Not the thrill of I did it, but the steadiness of I'm here. In the afternoon, he opened a drawer and took out the small box with their rings. It had been a long time. He lifted the lid. His ring lay there, metal soft with use. He slid it on. The cool spread and turned warm. The faint indentation on his finger aligned with the band, closing a gap. Grace stood in the doorway, saying nothing, just watching. Ethan raised his hand a little to catch the light on the circle. Not a new promise, he said quietly. A remembering of the old one. Grace came closer and brushed the back of his hand. Yes, she said. Remembering is a kind of beginning. Afternoon stretched into honeyed dusk. Light slanted across the living room wall, staining it the color of amber. Ethan sat at the table and wrote more lines. Today's work. Breathe. Make congee. Go to the park. Put the ring back on. The city is still loud, but the noise is like a backing track. The solo is the spoon on the bowl, your laugh. He set down the pen and looked out the window. A breeze carried the neighbor's wind chimes. Clear notes without a sting. Deeper down, a quiet decision formed. Not abrupt. Tomorrow he'd call and ask for an extra week off. Not to hide, but to finish lessons begun. Walk 1 block farther. Brew tea properly. Listen to what do you want. Until all 10 minutes had their say. Night fell gently. The apartment dimmed a notch. Ethan turned on the warm light and poured 2 cups of tea. They sat facing each other. How do you feel today? Grace asked, the question he'd dodged for years. Ethan looked into the cup, at steam softening his reflection, then looked up. I feel like I'm learning how to stay, he said. And lucky you're across from me. A plain answer, but one that traveled the whole distance inside his chest before it reached his mouth. On the balcony, the pothose leaves shivered once. Inside, the wall clock moved, hands taking slow, even steps. Ethan rested his palm on the table. No need to add more words. Slow, deep, enough. The day's last act closed with a warm sip of tea. At the bottom of the cup, a tiny sky flipped over, indifferent and patient. He drank it down and felt in his chest a quiet space that wasn't empty, a room reserved for things that would grow without being pushed. Part 2 closed like a door easing shut, no slam, so another room could open behind it. A room for the character's pulse, where an ordinary man learns to come back to life by doing ordinary things day by day. On the morning of the follow-up, the sky was so clear even the power lines overhead looked thinner and sharper than usual. Ethan and Grace walked to the bus stop and chose the back seats for easier on and off. The early breeze carried a light metallic scent from the shelter, braided with coffee drifting from a pushcart. Ethan drew a deep breath and gave Grace's wrist a quick squeeze, the way you might press a soft Lucky Charm. You okay? Grace asked, eyes skimming his face the way she'd learned to read small signals. I'm okay. Today we just listen. No proving anything, Ethan said, half smiling. The bus sighed to a stop. They climbed aboard. Inside, beige-gray fabric seats, cool metal rails. Ethan slid into the window seat, watching patches of sunlight wander over the upholstery, remembering the scattered light on the day he went home. As the bus pulled away, a young man rushed on, backpack slung over one shoulder, arms cradling a bundle of white chrysanthemums. He stood near them, breathing hard, sweat beading at his brow. You all right? Grace asked when she saw him clutch his chest. I think so. I'm going to the hospital, he said, breath short. My mom's in the ICU. I'm scared. I'll be late. The white flowers trembled with his breathing. Ethan watched the petals quiver and, without warning, the old corridor returned. Beeps, bright lights, the long hall. He turned to the boy, his voice slow and low, like the rise of a step. Try this. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. I'll count with you. The boy looked at Ethan, surprised, then nodded. Ethan lifted his hand and tapped the rhythm in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2 out, 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 cycles. 10. The shine of sweat on the boy's forehead softened. The bouquet settled. He smiled, self-conscious. Sorry, I just panicked. It's all right, Grace said, her smile tilting toward him as if she were pulling out a chair. There are good people at the hospital. Keep the breath steady. Think of your mom. When you get there, talk slow. The boy nodded quickly. Thank you. I'm in. He looked as if he wanted to ask Ethan more, but the bus had arrived. This is the hospital stop, he said, and hurried off with his flowers. Ethan watched him go. The young, straight back shivering a little like a sapling in wind. He remembered shaking like that once, with no one to show him how to breathe. Morning at the hospital was busy in a quiet way. Footsteps, paper turning, curtains sliding, everything in its place. At the registration desk, the same old security guard nodded at them, then looked a beat longer, a recognition that didn't need a name. Clinic 7, Grace read from the slip. 2nd floor. On the 2nd floor hall, a window was cracked. Wind stirred the leaves of an almond tree in the courtyard. Ethan waited and watched faces pass. A man in a blue puffer, a short-haired girl pushing a med cart, an elderly woman with a cloth tote. Each one looked like a sentence moving past a semicolon. His name came over a small speaker. Dr. Patel sat behind the desk, glasses on, a kind smile warming the room. He checked the labs, listened to the lungs, asked concrete questions. When does the fatigue hit? After which movement? How long does it last? Ethan answered calmly, as if describing yesterday's pot of congee. The doctor nodded. Good. You're keeping a sensible pace. Don't fear the slowness. Slowness helps the body remember. Ethan looked around, fingers drifting to his chest. Doctor, in the ICU, the silver-haired gentleman in the bed across. He stopped, not knowing what he meant to ask. How is he? Was he my keeper of lights? None of the questions felt right. Dr. Patel understood. He didn't make it, the doctor said gently. His wife still comes by the unit every week with cookies for the nurses. She's here today, I think. She often sits by the 1st floor window. They left the exam room and walked in silence for a time. On the stairs, a soft clack of wooden heels. Downstairs, by the window, an older woman sat with a small tin box on her lap, daisies painted on the lid. Her hair was short and silver. Her skin was thin as silk paper. She opened the tin and arranged round butter cookies on paper plates, her motions slow and precise. Ma'am, are you by any chance? Ethan began, hesitating. Your husband in the ICU. She looked up, dark, deep eyes, corners gathered into fine lines. She considered him without hurry. For an instant, a little bridge seemed to stretch between 2 unnamed shores. Then she smiled, very softly. Yes, he liked butter cookies. I bring some for the nurses every week. I think, in places like that, a warm smell shortens the day. Do you know that smell? Ethan nodded. Yes, I do. He sat in the chair across. Grace sat beside him. I was in his room. During that time, I think he helped me somehow. He gave a small, awkward laugh. Sounds strange. It doesn't, she said, tilting her head. People who are about to go often leave a very gentle light behind. I sit here because sometimes someone needs a bit of that light. She nudged the plate toward them. Have one. Ethan took a cookie. The butter bloom on his tongue carried him back to his grandmother's kitchen, the old wall clock, steady hands. His chest felt as if it opened another drawer just to hold that smell. Thank you. She nodded, asking nothing more. A nurse passed and lit up at the sight of her. You're here, she chirped. The woman smiled and held out the tin. For you. A little sweeter today. The nurse hugged the box, bowing her thanks. When she left, the woman turned to Grace. You're his wife? Yes, Grace said, her smile quiet. We wanted to say thank you. Thank who? The woman teased gently. He went quickly. I promised him I'd sit by the window for a while, to see who's hurrying and who's slow. She looked straight at Ethan. You're walking slow. Yes, I'm learning, Ethan said. She patted the seat beside her. It takes time. Learn it like cooking congee. Stir the same way, don't get impatient, and it will turn silky. That's all. She stood. I'll be going. Health to you both. She walked away, steady steps. Her figure shrank at the end of the hall, but the scent of butter lingered. They left the hospital and walked a good stretch, not calling a ride yet. It's still early, Grace said. Let's stop at the corner cafe. Small place. Low glass door, pale wood walls, a little cactus on the shelf. Ethan chose a table by the window. The server, a young woman with a high ponytail and a bright smile, brought menus. What can I get you? A hot black for me, Grace said. And for you? She turned to Ethan. A hot milk, he said, surprising himself. And a butter cookie, if you have it. She nodded and skipped away. Ethan watched the street through the frame of the window. People flowing at a steady clip. On the sidewalk came a small thud. A middle-aged man had dropped his bag, and an orange rolled to a girl's feet. She picked it up and held it out. You dropped this. He fumbled. Thank you. Life is full of these little handoffs, smooth as if they needed no script. Their tray arrived. I'm sorry, we're out of butter cookies, the server said. We have chocolate chip. Is that okay? Grace looked at Ethan. He smiled. It's fine. Today, any flavor is warm. The mug of hot milk steamed in front of him. He lifted it and blew, simple sweetness rising like wordless comfort. Grace sipped her coffee, winced at the first bitterness, and then smiled as it sweetened down her throat. A lot for one morning, she said. Yeah, Ethan answered. The boy with the chrysanthemums, the cookie lady. Dr. Patel. He paused, then added, I want to do something like she does. Nothing big. Just sit near a window a while. Grace set her cup down. We can start very small. For example, this week, you could write a few lines on the 424 breath and leave it at the clinic waiting area. I'll ask if we can post it. Ethan laughed, eyes warming. Good idea. Or, we could make a pot of congee and bring some to the security desk. The old guard who opens the door for us. He probably works nights. Grace nodded. And if we see Min, the flower boy, you can ask how he's doing. Doesn't have to be much. For a second, Ethan felt a new cord tie inside him. Not duty, but meaning. The small things lined up like a clean path, wide enough for two to walk side by side without bumping shoulders. When they left the cafe, the sun sat a little higher, flashing on manhole covers like tiny mirrors. On the way home, passing the park, Ethan stopped at an old lady's refreshment cart. Do you have butter cookies? He asked, half joking. I do. She laughed, pulling a few from a tin. Baked them myself. He bought a bag and handed it to Grace. For the guard, he said. And for us. That afternoon they swung by the hospital and went straight to the security desk. The old guard's eyes lit at the bag. Well now, who's so kind? We are, Grace said. Butter cookies. Please share. He grinned, a grin that opened space. Thank you both. And you look much better today, he said to Ethan. Take it slow. We're learning, Ethan said, and realized the phrase had become his new hello. On their way out, they met Min on the steps. The bouquet had lost a few blooms. Petals were a little bruised. He recognized them. His eyes were red but bright. My mom's still on the vent. The doctor said be patient. I almost fainted this morning. Thank you for the breathing. Ethan set a light hand on his shoulder. You did well. If you need to, count. And eat something. Low blood sugar makes the panic worse. Grace reached into her bag and offered him a cookie. Take this. It won't be as good as home, she joked. Min smiled, eyes watering cleanly. It's good because it's now. He glanced at the flowers, then whispered, I think she'll like the smell of butter. They parted at the door. That night, back at the table, Ethan opened the notebook. He wrote a small sign in clear, large letters. Breathe. In 4, hold 2, out 4. Repeat 10 times. Fix your eyes on something close. Drink water. He drew a tiny circle to stand for the ring, then scratched it out. No symbols needed, just words. He handed the page to Grace. Tomorrow, let's stop by the clinic and ask to put it up. Grace nodded. And tomorrow I'll buy more butter, she said. I'm going to learn to bake cookies. Ethan laughed. The laugh wasn't loud, but it was full of breath. I'll count for you when the recipe scares you, he teased. Grace pretended to glare and then laughed too. In the dark, as they settled in, Ethan whispered, "Thank you for the bus stop, the cafe, the cookies, all the small things." Grace pulled the blanket to his chest and answered with a sentence short and round. "We have lots of small things to do." In the gentle dark, the wall clock ticked, a sound familiar yet new. Ethan closed his eyes. Ahead of him, he didn't see the water corridor anymore, but a very real one. The bus stop, the hospital, the cafe, the guard's desk, the park. At each place, someone had left him a small square of light, enough to piece together a road. He breathed evenly. Beside him, Grace set her hand on his chest, her rhythm matching his heart like a silent conductor. Tomorrow, they would bring the 424 sign to the clinic, check on Min's mom, brew a pot of tea, and bake their first clumsy batch of cookies. Little things, simple as shoelaces, yet strong enough to keep him here. A man learning to come back by way of small conversations, day after day. That morning the sky was so clear the leaf tips seemed lit from within. Ethan woke earlier than usual and stood on the short balcony, hands around a cup of tea still warm. The tea's scent was fine as a pencil line, sketching the calm edges of the morning. Inside, Grace slipped a few butter cookies into a paper bag, folded the corners neatly, and clipped it with a small wooden pin like a period at the end of a sentence. They'd made a plan: stop by the hospital, check on Min, and, if allowed, leave the 424 breathing note at the waiting desk. "You okay?" Grace asked, opening the door. The hinge gave the faintest rasp, like a cricket deep in a tree. "Okay," Ethan said, feeling a roomy space in his chest. "Today, we just need to be there." On the way to the hospital, thin strips of sunlight lay across the crosswalk like slips of yellow paper. In the park, a little girl chased her own shadow, laughing, then stopped, surprised, when the shadow stopped too. "It's a good day," Grace said. Ethan nodded. The eagerness inside him wasn't a noisy kind. It was like a flat lake waiting for a pebble to touch and send rings outward. At the hospital gate, the old security guard sat with a newspaper, eyes lifting each time the doors hissed open. "Back again, you two," he said, voice catching with a held-back gladness. Grace passed him the butter cookies. "For you. Still butter, but I cut the sugar." He smiled, slow as a heavy gate easing wide. "Thanks kindly. You look better," he said to Ethan. "Take it slow. I'm still learning," Ethan said, half joking, half an admission to himself. The ground floor corridor was cool, antiseptic faint. Footfalls repeated like a wordless background score. They stopped at the information desk. "We're asking about a patient, Min's mother." Min's about 20, wavy hair, usually carrying white chrysanthemums, Grace said, her voice setting a soft cloth on the counter. The clerk checked a screen and nodded. "ICU, bed 7. Family says they may try to lighten sedation today, but only relatives can go in. You can wait on those chairs. We'll let you know if there's news." Ethan and Grace took seats near the window where the courtyard tree cast a trembling patch of shade. A carafe of water sat on a side table with stacked paper cups. Ethan poured one and sipped, feeling the water slide down like slender threads of light lining his chest. On the wall, a round clock took measured steps, each step a small, quiet tick, like a fingertip on wood. In that hush, he remembered the water corridor from the night. But now the memory stood framed in a corner, not pushing forward. The glass door opened and Min appeared in a worn gray t-shirt, eyes hollowed but bright, without the bouquet this time. He stopped at the threshold as if looking for a place to breathe. Seeing them, he came quickly, bowed, and set down a sentence as if laying down a stone he'd been carrying. "The doctor said, today Mom's responding better. They'll try to call to her." "Have you eaten?" Grace asked, the question that works anywhere. Min shook his head, smiling tautly, a string pulled too tight. "Not hungry." Grace handed him a cookie. "You don't have to be hungry. Just take a bite," as a way to say good morning. Min took it, nibbled a corner, chewing carefully as if afraid to crack something fragile. Watching him, Ethan suddenly saw those young, shaking hands like two small boats in a whirl, paddling for an even stroke. "Have you breathed yet?" Ethan asked. Min blinked. "Got it." Ethan tapped the rhythm lightly in the air. In for 4, hold 2, out for 4. The three of them breathed together, like a small choir on a single, simple note. After 10 rounds, Min's face unwound a little. He whispered, I'm scared they'll call and she won't hear. I'm scared of the silence. We were scared of silence, too, Ethan said, dropping his voice a notch. Sometimes silence is just the overture. Sit close. Talk like you always do. Say her name. Tell her about your day. Leave a pocket of quiet so she can step in. He didn't know where he'd learned that. Maybe from Grace's notebook, maybe from Dr. Patel's eyes, maybe from the silence that once held him. Min nodded, his shoulders lowered. A nurse stepped out of ICU and looked around. Min. He sprang up. Yes, me. Doctor will see you. 2 family members, 10 minutes. Everyone stay calm, she said, her glance pausing a beat on Ethan and Grace, as if to say, you wait here. Min looked at them, torn between wanting someone with him and the cool edge of the rules. Ethan nodded, a gentle hand in the small of the back without touching. Go. We'll be here. We'll breathe with you from out here. The door closed, and the hall returned to the steady sound of air and shoes. Ethan and Grace sat without talking. Between them, the air felt like a clean cloth stretched smooth. Grace leaned and set her hand on his knee, a touch to anchor, not to soothe. Remember the count? She asked, eyes on the tree. Ethan smiled, counting in his head, fingertip tapping the chair rail. Minutes grew long in the way only hospitals measure. The clock hands moved true, but each mark carried a question. The ICU door eased open. Min appeared behind the glass, eyes wet, mouth uncertain between smile and cry. Hey, he called, his tight voice snapping free like a broken string. My mom. She opened her eyes. He swallowed, smiled. Tears fell like light rain, small but persistent. She can't talk. The doctor says don't push. But as she looked at me, for a long time, Ethan stood faster than he thought he could. Warmth spread in his chest, not a flare but a thick ember. Grace was already there, squeezing Min's hand. That's good, she said, her voice like a step across smooth wood. The nurse told me to talk. Tell her something, Min said, wiping his face and grinning. I told her about the bus stop. And I told her about the butter cookies. He stopped and laughed at himself. I don't know why cookies. But her eyes, they looked brighter. Ethan didn't explain. He just nodded, light as a kite set free from a small nail in the ground. Another nurse came and made a small signal. One person can go in, 3 minutes. A familiar face only. Stand close, no touching. Min looked at Ethan with a question. Ethan shook his head and tipped it toward Grace. You go, he said. You're better than me at standing still with fragile things. Grace smiled and didn't argue. She stepped through. The door swallowed her, and Ethan remained with Min. They stood by the window and let the moment breathe. Ethan asked, anything else you want to tell your mom? Min bit his lip, thinking, I want to say I'm not mad anymore. About the time she made me come home early, the calls when I was working. He breathed, looking at his shoes. I want to say that if she gets better, we'll go to the park like we used to, sit on a bench and talk about small things. But I'm afraid saying it out loud is like asking for too much. Small things are usually the big things, Ethan said. Tell her about the park, about the shade, about pigeons eating from your hand. As he spoke, a bench rose in his mind, the kind he and Grace had used, each one with a shallow dip from so many sitters, like a river groove worn into stone. The door opened again. Grace came out, eyes damp but steady. She nodded, said nothing, and took Min's hand, guiding him toward the door. Go, she whispered. Talk about the park. Min went in. Ethan and Grace stayed outside, looking through the cloudy glass. Inside, he bent, not too close, so his mother could see him clearly. He spoke, shaping the words slowly. In the corner, machines kept at their work. The beeps held time like monochrome notes. Yet to Ethan, those beeps had a different key today, as if the accompanist's fingers had found the right weight on the keys. What do you see? Grace asked, barely above a breath, as if sound might snag on the moment. I see the light through the window like a thin road, Ethan said, eyes fixed on the two inside. And the beeps like Grandma's clock. When I was little, I thought that sound stretched the day. Now it feels like a seam pulling a torn day back together. A white coat passed behind them, Dr. Patel. He paused to look in, then turned to them. He smiled, his eyes carrying the creases of a long night. Good news, he said softly, as if offering a tender blade of grass. She's coming out of sedation. Don't expect too much too fast. Today, let her see the faces she loves and hear the stories she knows." He nodded and moved on, his steps steady as the count he'd taught. Inside, Min talked, saying things that seemed unimportant. "Mom, remember the park? The big almond tree by the pond, the bench we used to take. Yesterday I saw a kid chasing his shadow and laughing. You used to laugh like that." He paused, breathed in and out, and went on. "If you're tired, close your eyes. I'm here. I'll sit here till you want to open them again." Ethan saw the mother's eyelids tremble. Nothing cinematic, just a small shift between two lashes, like a little boat loosening its moor. Then, very slowly, the lids opened. The pupils drifted, sought a place to hold, and came to rest on Min's face. A tear slid from the corner of her eye. Min nodded, and his lips shaped a word Ethan could guess through the glass. "Mom." She didn't speak. Her hand lay still, but her eyes brightened, like an oil lamp just uncovered. Grace touched Ethan's arm. They stood very still and let the moment say itself. No applause in them, no burst of exclamations. Only a new kind of quiet, the quiet of a seed cracking open. Somewhere in that web of tubing and wire, numbers hopped a notch and settled again, like birds changing branches without jarring the nest. The door eased shut once more, keeping out sound but not light. Light kept pouring through, inching across the floor, touching shoes, chair legs, and the folded 4-2-4 note in Ethan's pocket. He took it out, smoothed the crease, and handed it to Grace. She nodded slowly, as if answering a question no one had asked. "Yes, now." Inside, Min kept talking, sometimes only her name, sometimes a street corner story, a cat slipping under a car, a cloud shaped like a fish, the church bell at the end of the block. Each sentence made his mother blink once, longer each time. Dr. Patel returned and stood at the foot of the bed, watching mother, son, and waveforms. He said something, maybe good, maybe on track. Through the glass, the words dissolved into the beeping like salt into water. Ethan drew a long breath, no longer the taste of fear, but the soft smack of hope just sprouted. He remembered his own days in that bed, looking through glass, receiving Grace's invisible touch. Now he stood outside, looking in, sending that same touch to Min and his mother. The circle didn't close with trumpets. It clicked shut with the small sound of a heart finding its beat again. "Let's go," Grace whispered. "Give them the room." Ethan nodded. They stepped back, one step, then two, making space for the light to widen. Before turning away, he looked once more, a mother with steady eyes, a son keeping watch, hands held in front, no touching, but present. The unseen lines between them were tuned just right, humming like newly strung strings. The ICU door closed. In the hall, the clock kept its gentle time. Ethan and Grace walked toward the stairs. The floor shone underfoot like a mirror that needed no face. On the wall, sunlight fell in bands, soft as silk ribbon. Ethan set his palm on the rail and felt the cool metal soak into his skin, lending a little clarity to feeling. He turned to Grace. She didn't speak, just smiled, not bright, but warm, like home. He answered with the slightest nod, as if nodding to the man he'd been a year ago and to the stranger from that night's corridor. "Stay." They moved down the steps. No more words needed. With each tread, Ethan heard a steady tick inside his chest. Each tick stitched another open story closed. And behind the door, at bed 7, a pair of eyes had opened to the morning, like a narrow road of light finally bridging two shores. In that exact moment, the story paused, not because it was finished, but because it was enough. The light had entered the room. The days after Min's mother opened her eyes passed like calendar pages no one was in a hurry to tear away. The city stayed loud, but that noise stood politely at the door, like a visitor who didn't step all the way inside. Ethan woke early, brewed his own tea, and let the water fall from the kettle like a thin hot thread. Steam gathered into a small mist, so light that if he leaned, it vanished. But each morning he waited for it, a greeting spoken in vapor. On the table, the pale blue notebook lay open, a wooden clip pinching the middle, the pen resting on the edge with its tip kissing the paper, leaving the faintest brown dot. Grace rose a beat after him. Barefoot, she crossed the room, each step a soft thump on the wood. "Looks like sun today," she said, watching a slice of light slip past the curtain's edge. Ethan nodded. I'm walking 2 blocks, he answered, as if announcing a trustworthy schedule to his body. They didn't say much more. They'd learned to save important sentences for the right hour and the right breath, the way you measure a pinch of salt for a pot of soup. After that morning at the hospital, Ethan visited those white corridors less often. He and Grace had asked the clerk to post the 4-2-4 note at the waiting desk. She smiled and taped it beside the clinic hours, a handwritten thank you from someone and a child's scribble of a son. Min texted to say his mother sometimes opened her eyes, sometimes for a long look, sometimes too tired. I sit there and read an old lesson, he wrote. It's called Stay. Ethan didn't reply at once. He set the phone down and sat still for a minute, bowing to a wordless piece of music, and then wrote. Sit. Count. Talk small. At home he began a new rhythm that, from the outside, could be called plain to the point of dull, washing dishes, watering the pot hose, wiping the table, folding towels, scrubbing the white porcelain teapot. Inside him, each task was a breathing exercise done with his hands. Washing a cup, he felt warm water thread between his fingers like strands of light. Watering the plant, the smell of damp soil opened a small path into his chest. Folding a towel, the fabric rested under his palms like a quiet shoreline, holding his handprint for a moment, then letting it fade. He wrote in the notebook, Life. Wash 1 cup until it's clear. And beneath it, a thin line. No need to be big. Sometimes Grace sat across from him at the laptop, finishing a few tasks. The clack of keys kept its own beat. Ethan sat at the dining table with a thin book heavy on white space, some poems. He didn't try to understand quickly. Each poem was like a chair set at the threshold. Arrive, sit, look out, hear the soft rush of traffic, the pothose leaves rustle, and get up again without a photo, without many notes. Now and then he read Grace a passage, his voice flat and steady, like repeating breathing instructions. Grace listened and closed her eyes at the endings, the way you listen to a melody you already know. In the afternoons, they went to the park. They shared a bench. Not too close, not too far. The distance just right for each to remain themselves while hearing the other's rhythm. Children ran past. Pigeons dropped down. Sunlight fell as golden coins and shifted when the wind turned. Ethan watched a boy practicing balance on a beam, tipping left, tipping right, finally holding for a beat and grinning as if he'd planted a flag. I used to think balance meant holding still, Ethan said. Now I think balance is the right amount of sway. Grace smiled, eyes on the birds. That's something a person who's learned to breathe would say, she answered. Sometimes he stopped at the corner cafe for a hot milk and a seat by the glass. The server recognized him. Each time she brought his cup, she added a tiny spoon. For stirring, she'd say, with no further explanation. Breath fogged the window, then vanished when someone pushed the door. In ICU, an opening door had meant a rush of cold. Here it brought the smell of toasted bread. He wrote in the notebook, Doors, where the wind changes character. Once, as he sat there, he saw Min pass by with a smaller bouquet, no longer chrysanthemums, but a few purple sprigs of lavender. Min glanced in, met Ethan's eyes, and lifted the bouquet like a ticket. Ethan nodded, no signal beyond that. They understood, no need to come in, no need to speak. Sometimes seeing each other through glass was a whole sentence. Nights, Ethan slept better. Before bed, he set his hand over his chest, where the ring had rested for days, feeling warmth pass through the skin like an unseen ember. He counted 4, 2, 4, not from fear anymore, but as a simple rite. When he woke at night, he didn't go to the balcony as he used to, didn't scroll for something to keep his eyes busy. He sat up, poured a sip of water, listened to the tiny sound of it falling back into the glass, small as a minute hand's click, and lay down again. He started calling that small hush padding. Between daytime tasks, he laid these pads. 10 breaths between washing dishes and folding towels. 3 breaths looking at the sky before answering email. After an argument, if one came, placing a palm on the table without speaking, waiting until the heat behind the ear cooled. Arguments, those still happened, because 2 people are 2 people. Some days Grace bristled when he forgot to turn off the kettle. Some days Ethan snapped because she'd left the balcony door unlocked. They still spoke faster than their better selves allowed. But at the end of the tussle, they'd learned one move, slow. Give it a minute, Ethan would say, leaning against the windowsill, counting 4, 2, 4 before returning to the table. Grace set her hand on the notebook without writing, smoothed a pinch of paper, then took his hand. Done. No long apologies, no scorekeeping. The big things in life aren't always fixed by clever lines. The small things almost always soften with one slower beat. One weekend, Ethan climbed onto a chair and pulled down an old box from the closet. Inside, the film camera he'd bought on a trip years ago. He cleaned the lens, slowly, like polishing something kept on an altar, planning to photograph everything. Grace asked, hanging a towel. No, he said. Just a little. 1 frame a day. Not to show off, just to look long enough. He took the camera to the balcony and peered through the viewfinder. The world narrowed to a rectangle. Nothing in there rushed, because it had to wait for him to turn the focus ring. He shot the pot hose, the two of them cast as a single shadow on the wall, a cup of hot milk still steaming. The frames reminded him that life already has edges. You don't need to add noisy borders. One noon, sweeping the floor, he stopped when he saw a slim curve of light on the boards, the sun passing through a glass on the table and bending into a soft ribbon. He set the broom aside and sat by the light, touching it with a fingertip as if it were a gentle animal. What are you doing? Grace asked from the kitchen, hands dusted with flour. Touching light, he said, embarrassed at how childish that sounded. Good, Grace said without a smile. The broom can wait. She sat beside him, and they watched the ribbon change shape as clouds moved and the glass tilted. No photo taken. No note written. The ribbon left like a guest who knows today is for a brief hello. Men sent updates now and then. A photo of his mother's hand resting lightly on his. A corner of the bed with the lavender laid there. Spare lines without emojis. Once he wrote, "She slept a lot today. I'm not scared the way I was." Ethan read it, set the phone down by the teapot, and replied later, "Good. Sleep is part of healing." Min answered, not with an icon, but a short line. "Thank you for the 424." Ethan thought about thank you as a verb, not saying thanks, but feeling the grace that's present. Ordinary mornings. A cup of tea that doesn't spill. A kettle remembered and turned off. A bird holding the wire 5 seconds longer than usual. Those are the grace. Feeling them is the lesson. He wrote in the notebook, "Stillness, when grace has a place to sit." Rain came. It slanted across the balcony and dotted the glass, beads that slid and merged. Ethan and Grace pulled their chairs to face the window and said nothing. The water traced surprising paths, some straight, some crooked, some swerving just before they met, some joining and growing heavy. Ethan thought, if I'd had time to sit like this years ago, maybe I would have spared myself a few loops of confusion. He didn't blame the man he was. That man didn't know how to sit. Now he didn't need the old him to understand. He only needed to sit. When the sun returned, they walked to the corner market. The vegetable seller handed him a bunch of scallions still wet. The sharp greenness stung his eyes. Ethan asked the woman when morning glory was best to buy. She laughed. Early, while the leaves are firm. By noon, they sag. He nodded and thought about the day's rhythms. When the body is firm, soft, durable, tired. People are like greens, he thought. We each have our hour for picking. He chose a bunch of greens, some fish, some mushrooms, paid, and got back a few coins and a wish that wasn't quite a wish. Go slow. He smiled. The phrase followed him now like a friendly spell with no pressure. That evening he cooked dinner. Knife through onion, scent rising. Oil warming to a light chatter, mushrooms hitting the pan and singing like a brief rain. Grace set the table, 2 white bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks aligned. They ate. Nothing fancy, but each spoonful landed like a period in the right place, keeping the paragraph from falling apart. Afterward, Ethan washed, Grace wiped. 2 hands of one body, neither insisting on being the lead. Before the night dropped fully, Ethan wound a tiny music box he'd found while cleaning, a forgotten gift. The tune came out thin as a silver thread. Simple, repeating, no climax. He set it on the shelf and let it run down to silence. In the quiet after, he heard the clock hands, a car far away, leaves brushing leaves, Grace's breathing shifting from wakefulness toward sleep. None of these asked him to explain. They existed like kind neighbors. One night, writing in the notebook, he stopped in the middle of a sentence. What were you going to write? Grace asked from the bed. I was going to write, I want to do something big, Ethan said. but my hand refuses to write big. Grace sat up against the pillows. That's because you already did, she said. You stayed. Ethan looked at her, then at the page. The word want stood alone in the center, followed by a wide blank. He didn't add to it. The white space was beautiful. He switched off the lamp and let the blank sleep. The next morning, Min's text arrived early. Mom smiled today. Just a little. Like a band of sunlight. Ethan read it and felt the corner of his own mouth move the same way. He sent back a photo of the light ribbon on the floor, the one he and Grace had watched. No words. After a while, Min replied with a picture of his mother's hand on the sheet, a thin stripe of sun across it. No words. The images moved between them like two small mirrors catching one and the same unnamed light. On Sunday, they went to Grandma's, the house with the old wall clock. A relative opened the door. The mingled smell of wood, old pillows, and vines from the yard set home. Ethan stood beneath the clock and listened to the tick that once stretched a day like taffy. Now the sound was round, a hook that kept time from running too fast. He stood there a long while, like a pilgrim before a sign, not sacred but dear. Grace tugged lightly at his sleeve, as if to say, "We've arrived." He nodded, "We've arrived," and laughed because the words were both a report and a benediction. On the way back, dusk laid out rectangles of warm light in apartment windows. Ethan looked at those frames and saw small lives cooking, laughing, keeping quiet, arguing, and, most likely, laying a hand on the table to pause. He didn't feel outside those frames anymore. If his life closed on scenes like these, it would be enough. That night he wrote his shortest line yet. No need to do anything big. Beneath it, a smaller line. The ink smeared where his hand brushed it. Just stay. He set down the pen, turned out the light, and lay back. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside, a clock had just been wound again, steady, unrushed. He closed his eyes and felt his breath travel through a quiet house, past the kitchen, across the table, onto the balcony, by the park bench, down a hospital corridor. The places he'd been didn't demand testimony anymore. They spoke one sentence in the language of wood, steel, water, leaf, stay. And he, quietly, stayed. Dawn comes very early in the last days of winter. Not the brassy gold of summer, but a tender light, cool, pale, and soft as freshly stirred milk. It slips through the slats of the curtain, slicing into thin layers that fall across the table, the water glass, the pale blue notebook still open to its final page. Ethan wakes before the clock can ring, as if his body has relearned the natural rhythm of light. He doesn't turn on the lamp. The room rests like an unwritten sheet of paper. Only Grace's steady breathing in the next room, and the clock, tick, tick, keep the familiar score of a life. Ethan sits up, pulls on a thin sweater, and steps onto the balcony. The air still holds a night chill. There's the damp smell of dew, and somewhere a first bird calls, small, but enough to crack the dark with a bright seam. He pours water and makes tea. The tea turns in the cup. A little steam lifts and twines with the first rays, the two of them mingling until the room looks like a photograph coming up in a tray, patches of light and shadow blooming into focus. He sips. The gentle bitterness slips down his throat like a very small greeting the new day has sent. On the table, the notebook lies open to the last lines he wrote last night. No need to do anything big. Just stay. The pen rests on its side, the tip dry to touch, leaving a faint print like a fingerprint. Ethan looks at the lines and smiles. He adds nothing more. The white space below is wide, as if set aside for today to write its own continuation. The bedroom door opens softly. Grace appears in a white sleep shirt, hair a bit tousled, her eyes still holding sleep. "You're up early," she says, her voice roughened by morning. "I heard a bird," Ethan answers. "It called me up." Grace sits by the table, pours tea, blows the steam. "Let's go to the park today," she says. Ethan nods. "Yes, and bring cookies. It's been a while since we baked." She laughs. "Remember the first batch we burned?" "I do. But that batch was the best, because it still had the taste of a first time." They fall quiet and look out the frame of the door. The light sharpens, climbing the wall, skimming the picture frames, touching the chipped porcelain cups they've kept because they drink warmer. From the entryway, the smell of damp earth and tea weave together into a fragrance only those who truly live slowly can recognize. Grace stands and draws the curtain. The light pours in, not loud, just broad. It spreads like an old, unhurried friend walking into the house, setting a hand on your shoulder, smiling. I'm here. The room clears. Everything looks newly exact, even their breathing. Ethan squints into that stream, then turns to Grace. This light, he says softly. In the ICU I used to dream of it, but it was cold. Now it isn't. It's warm. Maybe because it passed through us before it got here. Grace doesn't answer. She lays her hand on his. A small gesture, full of meaning, like the final rest at the end of a song that needs no words. They sit that way, watching the light dance on the floor, the table, the wall, little bright pulses like the world's own breath. Somewhere the clock keeps its even time. A car outside beeps as it parks. The sound threads into birdsong and the faint simmer of the kettle. The old sounds have returned, but they no longer speak out of duty. They simply exist. Ethan takes up the film camera and turns the knurled wheel. He lifts it and looks through the viewfinder. In the glass, morning light floods the doorway and spills over Grace's face. It's all too near, too real, and he forgets to press the shutter. He lowers the camera and smiles. No need to take it. This one can't be developed. Grace looks at him, smiling lightly. You're still keeping the film empty? Yes. For the moments you can't hold with your hands. Those are the ones I'll take. A breeze comes through. The curtain stirs. The light ripples and waves. They keep still. Ethan draws a long breath. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. Beside him, Grace matches the count. The 2 breaths merge and thin into the light spreading through the room. Outside, the city starts to wake. A first car whispers by, a street vendor's call fades, someone's wooden heels tap on the walk. But inside this room, time moves differently, slower, deeper, gentle as a last piece of music that never needs a final chord. Ethan looks up. The morning light touches his eyes and makes him narrow them, and for a second every image, every sound, every breath seems to pause, leaving only the light. Not blazing, not sharp, just enough for him to see clearly the face beside him, the steam above the cup, the tiny dust motes drifting in the air. And he knows, this is enough. He doesn't have to think further, hunt for meanings, or close any circle. The light has done that for him. He looks outside. The sky washes into a pale blue. On the wire, a bird lifts its throat and sends out one clear note, round, resonant, full of life. Ethan sets his hand on the table and smiles. Today, he says, we begin again. Grace turns to him and nods. The light streams across and touches them, warm, gentle, unending.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. See you again.